My top 5 gaming systems of all time. And this is just my personal opinion and my experiences. And, from like 1982 to current gen or whatever. I'm going to go with number 5, Sega Saturn. I had quite a bit of fun on the Sega Saturn even before getting the Japanese import carts and mods and stuff so you can play imported games, and getting the RAM carts for all the CPS and CPS2 and Neo Geo ports and stuff like that. So just personal experience, and compared to the PS1, yeah, the PS1 was more successful, or you can say one was successful and one wasn't in, North America. The PS1 was highly successful, and, it just about probably took Nintendo off the map, as far as being the top dog. But I had a lot of fun playing, a lot of the working designs, role-playing games and stuff like that, and strategy games like Dragon Force, Albert Odyssey, and a number of other games. And then, like I said, I played it a lot before I got the Japanese imports. But once you get those 1 and 2 and 4 meg upgrade cards, and you get a way to play these imported games, you're opened up to, your world's open up to a much bigger world, because of course Japan not only had more releases that didn't come to North America, they also had these upgrades which made them almost as powerful as a Neo Geo or arcade system, 3 times more powerful than the PlayStation 1, as far as RAM and stuff. It had, I guess you could say, a superior version of Symphony of the Night, or Dracula X, whatever you want to call it, the Castlevania game. I think it was a little more difficult, the Saturn version, but they had actually more maps and more areas to explore than the PS1 version. And I played the PS1 version first all the way through it. Love the game. I think the graphics on the PS1 are just slightly better, because this isn't a 1 or 4 or 2 meg RAM game. It's just a normal standalone game that you didn't have to have a upgrade card or anything for. But a couple games people would probably throw up there, including a lot of the like Japanese 3D shoot 'em ups, space shooters and stuff like that didn't even come out in North America. So it was just an all around fun system. I really loved X-Men versus Street Fighter, which required that 4 meg cart, RAM cart, and they sold it in a version that had the cart with it, and I think possibly without it, for people that already had the cartridge. But I had something to compare it to. I also had the CPS2 arcade board of X-Men versus Street Fighter. The load times weren't, super bad or anything on the Saturn. They were, it wasn't like a Neo Geo or, a 3DO system where sometimes you have really horrible load times. And I have, I think, at least one North American Sega Saturn, maybe 2. And I have the Derby Stallion Saturn, which is, I guess, the skeleton Saturn. It came, with a Derby Stallion game, like a racing simulation, I believe, horse racing simulation. Awesome system. I know they had, in Japan, white systems. Probably have like 10 different systems, some of them look a little bit different or have different shaped buttons. Some of them are just different colors, or like the skeleton or Derby Stallion, which is a kind of a translucent system. Number 4, the original Xbox, what they call the OG, before the 360, before the Xbox One, before the Xbox One X, before the Xbox Series X, we had just the Xbox, the big black box, heavy box, had a hard drive built in. Microsoft's first, foray or whatever into the console market. And I don't know what specifically it is or was about it, because I had a GameCube, I had a PS2, and all of that, all the systems, the consoles at least. And for whatever reason, I just enjoyed the Xbox a whole lot. I loved, the first Odd World, and I think Soul Calibur, several of the RPGs, and a lot of them like Baldur's Gate and stuff were I believe on the PS2 and probably GameCube as well. So as far as exclusives, Halo, even though it was so mainstream, so people put Halo on such a high pedestal that if you hadn't played it before you heard the hype and then you played it afterwards, there's no way, in my opinion, that it'll meet your expectations. So that's kind of what happened to me when I started playing Halo. But I still love the Xbox. I played a lot of it. Outlaw Volleyball, and it's kind of raunchy, but with that said, it has awesome game mechanics, very fun. It's almost like a role-playing style game. You build up your levels, and I guess unlock stuff, and also I used to play that a lot. We also can't forget like Morrowind, Elder Scrolls, and it was released as a buggy version, and they released a Game of the Year version that did not fix the bugs. But if the PC was obviously the way to play that game. But if you did not have a PC or wasn't a PC gamer, that was still a very, very good option to play. The TurboGrafx 16 PC Engine Turbo Duo. Oh my gosh, this was the system that not a lot of game rental stores had, and therefore people in general didn't have those systems. In your neighborhood, you might have had one person out of so many gamers that had a console, and it's unfortunate. The graphics were decent. I think it was it considered really an 8-bit system. It had some kind of 16-bit something, but I think it was like a dual 8-bit system. And there's confusion with how do you label a system? Is a Neo Geo an 8-bit system? Is it a 16-bit system? Is it a 24-bit system? Because you're piling CPUs and stuff on top of CPUs and different bits of GPUs and all that good stuff. But this is also like one of the first CD-ROM systems. You could get a CD attachment, and then later on you could get the Turbo Duo, which had the CD built in. And then there was a Super Graphics system, which had a little bit more RAM and allowed you to play, some more of the arcade ports and stuff. And there was also an arcade card. So you had your normal CD, then you had Super CD, then you had the arcade card CD, which had the highest amount of RAM to load, like Strider and a few of the other arcade ports and stuff like that. To me, the East Book 1 and 2 would have been worth buying the whole system and CD-ROM, in the olden days. But there were some, multiplayer RPGs, Double Dungeons. I think it was a 2-player, split screen game. Then there was a few 4 or 5 player action RPGs, Dungeon Explorer 1 and 2, and Last Alert, and a lot of shooters like Airzone and platformers like Bonk's Adventure 1, 2, 3. Um, um, and then you go like in a lot of systems in these days to Japan, where they call it the PC Engine. You had all these extra RPGs. You had all these extra, like fighters and arcade type beat 'em ups, and you had like more shooters like space shooters and stuff like that. Which there are a lot of cool shooters on this system, just like the Sega Saturn. But to me, yeah, East Book 1 and 2 worth the price of admission, at least at the time. These guys are getting to be up there in price right now, though. And this is weird. The PlayStation 3 will be the next one. It started out rough. The whole launch, everything started out rough. I believe the PS2 was outselling the PS3 for the longest time. But what it did have for it was online, free online service, so you could play online games for free, unless they were like maybe some massive multiplayer online RPGs. I'm not sure if PSO came to that one or not, like Phantasy Star Online, but yeah, it also had 3D support for 3D Blu-rays and 3D games, so you could take your 3D TV and you could play, like, I believe Doom here had been 3D enabled or whatever. Some of them might have required a firmware or software update. But yeah, it was kind of cool playing a few of the first-person shooters or whatever in 3D. There's definitely quite a few of them on the system, and I'm highly into 3D, or at least I used to be. And now I have kids, so it's kind of a little bit harder to game. It's harder to find time to watch movies that are adult or more just for me or Natalie. So I mean, there's some pretty awesome RPGs on the PS3 and just a lot of cool games. Now, the PS3 had HDMI 1.3 specs, and they had worked some kind of magic where they could get some of the HDMI 1.4 stuff working on it, like 3D video and stuff, but when you combine that with some of the next-gen audio formats, and I believe it downgraded some of those formats to like Dolby Digital or possibly Stereo Pro Logic or something, and I was upgrading to DTS:X and Dolby Atmos, so I had to go with a standalone player. But for the longest time, I used my PlayStation 3 as a sole Blu-ray 3D player, and I had hundreds of 3D Blu-rays at the time. Now I have even more. But I mean, and there really are only a limited amount of like true 3D and Atmos or DTS:X releases. Still, I wanted the best of both worlds. Now to my number one most favorite system, which was actually an add-on, the Sega CD. They did have some like a CDX, which had the CD and the cartridge slot built in, and there was another system that had them built in, and there was a Laserdisc system where I believe you had to actually buy the little slot. It would, you could buy a Sega Genesis module, you could buy a Turbo Graphics module, and maybe like a karaoke or some other kind of module for it. But for the most part, this was an upgrade system for the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive. And to me, that right there, Final Fight, was the sole reason that I wanted a Sega CD. I probably talked about this in a previous video. I had the Super Nintendo version. I played the arcade version whenever I seen it on the arcades or when the fair came around, and they always had that game. Or if I went to an amusement park that had it, I played it all the time. Some people play Streets of Rage, and that's a big debate. Which one's better, Final Fight versus Streets of Rage? But to me, Final Fight is just in my blood. But with that being said, the a second reason I bought it was knowing that Dragon's Lair and some of the other arcade Laserdisc games were going to be released on the system. Space Ace, Dragon's Lair 2 was supposed to come out, but I guess the Sega CD failed in the North American marketplace too soon for that to happen. A lot of people would say this one is worth the price of admission. And, as far as later releases, Snatcher was a later release. I love Time Gal. It was I guess an arcade Laserdisc release as well. It might have been Japan only, but I'm not sure. But it was actually a pretty cheap game when I bought it new. But Lunar Eternal Blue, and that is another game that's worth the price of admission. I don't know how many hundreds of dollars this game alone cost now. It was $100 game when it came out, and I was told that it was a mail order only game, so probably a very limited release. But there's, to me it was harder to get into that game. It took longer to get into it than the first Lunar Silver Star story, or just the Silver Star, which was something you could get into instantly, but it was a very short game. Lunar Eternal Blue is a very long game, like 40 to 60 hours probably. Very fun, very adventurous, so many things going on there. But yeah, Dragon's Lair, I waited for it to come out. The mall that I was waiting for the game to be released, sold in like KB Toys or Sears or something like that. It did not come out on release day. And it was like delayed for whatever reason, at least locally. It may not have been a worldwide delay, but I read magazines all the time, so I kind of had an idea, this was the release date, Video Games and Computer Entertainment, Electronic Game Monthly, and, I'd go to grocery stores and just look through the magazines. Sometimes I would buy them, sometimes I would just look through them, and I would look at release dates, and, this is coming to Sega CD, this is coming to, whatever, but I eventually did get it, and you know what? That was an $80 game. In hindsight, I should have waited 5 years and got it for $10 at a flea market or something. It's a cool game. I love that they put these Laserdisc arcades out, on the Sega CD. That the graphics, resolution isn't great compared to 3DO and other things that might have used like MPEG 1 and MPEG 2 video quality. But if that were the only options, and it was, I knew about the 3DO, but we couldn't afford a 3DO when it was released, then having these games on this system was worth it. Dungeon Explorer, it was also on the Sega CD, not just on TurboGrafx. But Road Rash, this is, definitely part. I don't know if this game alone would have been worth the price of admission, but it is the best version of the game of Road Rash CD that was released, even for the compared to the Sega Saturn, PlayStation 1, PC, because it had these, the music in game versus on the cutscenes and the menus and stuff. You were cruising to Soundgarden and all of the, uh, you know, the bands that played in this game. So that made it the best version of Road Rash CD, in my opinion. Some people might have liked the better graphics of the 32-bit versions, but that's fine. I mean, this is the most different, and you're not really going to change my mind. And Dark Wizard. Dark Wizard and Lunar Eternal Blue are my absolute two favorite games of all time. And I'll talk about that in another video. And it's a kind of like a multi-genre, strategy sim, RPG adventure. And believe it or not, I bought it at Toys R Us when they were clearing out these games, all Sega CDs and 32Xs for $10 a piece. I had no idea what this game was about. It just kind of looked neat, cool. I had a limited amount of money. We could only buy like 5 games. It would have been nice if I could have bought all the ones I wanted, 30 games or whatever, but, we weren't rich. But this turned out to be a very good investment because it's, once you get into it, and it takes a while to get into it, like Eternal Blue, and you get the hang of it, it's an awesome adventure. Tons and tons of Japanese games as well, strategy simulations, RPGs, a few of the arcade ports that never made it to North America, like all of these guys here, and you may notice like a Record of Lotus War being like a anime or something, and Heroic Legend of Arslan. You might recognize like Arceus Odyssey and stuff like that. So one thing I'll talk about, why not PS1? Why wasn't the PS1 or PS2 in my list? I had all of those systems. I would say that the Sega CD did not have a whole lot of releases, but a lot of the releases they had, the majority of them I'd say, are top quality releases. If I release 200 games on my console that are pretty decent quality, that people like, it may look different on paper, but if my competitor releases 200 games that were good and 400, 500, 600 games that were duds, that were bad, mediocre, on paper, that looks better on them, I guess. And I've seen like Nintendo Wii and a few of the consoles just have a lot of the old duck shoot, or we'll just repeat the in-game games, the games you get when you get the system, like your bowling and all that stuff. We'll just make 30 versions of that, or and call it something else. We'll put different characters and change a couple sprites here and there, but that doesn't make quality releases. And I've had almost every video game system released, from the 70s to now. I've had probably over 3,000 games, maybe 3,500 in my lifetime. I have probably about 2,300 or more right now. I've played, hundreds, if not 1,000 more, arcades, computer games, video games from consoles, handhelds, and I think it's just my personal opinion, but I've experienced gaming quite a bit. I'm not a professional gamer. I don't game 24/7. I may have done that a little bit, in my teenage years. Um, but just in my opinion, the Sega CD was about, the releases, the games that. No offense to the Nintendo and Super Nintendo and all the other games and systems that I enjoyed, throughout my lifetime. And, Nintendo and Atari 2600. In some ways, like Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, they were all systems that a lot of people had, in the neighborhood. We enjoyed them immensely, and there were franchises and games that I was introduced to in those, systems, on those systems, like Nintendo, Dragon Warrior, Castlevania, Super Nintendo. We had Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time, and a variety of other games. And the Super Nintendo was kind of the system that started looking similar as far as like arcade like. Street Fighter 2 was coming out, and even though it wasn't quite the same graphics and stuff, it was, comparable. And we played the hell out of the Super Nintendo, Super Street Fighter 2 and stuff like that. So there's, if your favorite system is not on the list, is not because that I think it sucks or anything like that. Even if you love the 3DO, or the Atom Clico or whatever, that is fine. Even VIC 20, come on. I used to play the VIC 20 all the time with its horrible graphics and all that stuff, but I guess that's, we had text adventures like Scott Adams or whatever, text adventures being introduced to like the VIC 20, because you just didn't have the graphics. And that's, BBS systems, you dial up and you play, mostly text, like Baron Realms Elite and stuff like that. And MUDs or multi-user dungeons, like that was like our online RPGs before we had graphical RPGs. So, yeah, if you're not, your system ain't on there, your favorite one, I mean, and if you ask me next year or 5 years from now, I might put the Nintendo, or Super Nintendo up there. That's my top 5. But for right now, that's my top 5. Take care.